Welcome to Discograffiti's Private Press, the Patreon exclusive podcast that takes buried treasure one step farther. This treasure's buried so goddamn deep, there's probably no way you'll ever find it in your lifetime, not at least in its original iteration. And so thus, if music's your thing, I mean really, really your thing, and obviously it is, because here you are, you will not experience any more value for your listening dollar than with this series. One thing we can all agree on in here, our favorite dessert is definitely mint, but we'll settle for near mint in a pinch. I'm your co-host, Dave Gebro, and before you go getting yourself into a tizzy there, I know what you're thinking. What have they done with my theme song, my always reliable theme song? There's an answer for that. Also, I didn't sign up for any Patreon kind of deal. So what's the story there, man? Don't worry. This is simply episode 1 of a whole new show called Discograffiti's The Private Press with Paul Major. Almost every week, it's going to be behind the paywall on Patreon, but seeing as I'm a good-hearted sort of chap, once in a while, including the premiere episode, I wanted to throw all you guys a bone, and I want to keep doing that every once in a while. Maybe every 5 or 6 shows or so on, we'll put it out there for everyone to hear. This is the premiere episode of Discograffiti's The Private Press with Paul Major, and it's coming at you free of charge today. Anyway, I'm your co-host, Dave Gebro, and my co-host is an honest-to-God rock star, an author, and one of the most notorious record collectors that ever walked this sweet swinging sphere. After playing in bands in St. Louis and Los Angeles, this son of a bee moved to New York in 1978 and spent the next few years embroiled in the city's punk scene, notably as part of the proto-speed metal band The Sorcerers. And then, what do you know? This guy began a mail-order LP business whose mailers one would tear open with the ravenous zeal of brains to the undead. His catalog descriptions are what drove people wild, consistently transcending rock criticism with a series of philosophically sound, aesthetic principles that serve to guide the way forward with ease for the uninitiated. The new worlds he offered to lucky listeners over the years translated with crunchy sonic perfection to his metamorphosis as a mother-effing Cro-Magnon rock star. In 1997, he began captaining Endless Boogie, which to date have released 6 LPs and a gaggle of EPs. And then 5 years ago, in ye old days of 2017, this Renaissance man for the ages authored the book Feel the Music, The Psychedelic Worlds of... I had to mumble that so as to not give away the goods. More on that later, because holy shit, boys and girls, he looks like a caveman, but don't get it twisted. This Paleolith is one knockout punch of a sweetie tootie patootie. Lads and ladies of the Patreon Supersphere, please, for the love of Christ, would you explode forth ecstatically in your appreciation of what's to come, because it really is about to, and all over your face for that matter. Damn it, here he is, Paul Major.
Yes, here I am.
There you are.
And I'm with you now.
And it's about time too, right?
Yes.
Let's talk about the build up to this very moment. Christmas of 2021. We're in the midst of a soul sucking, skin flaying, spirit ravaging pandemic, and my wife hits the nail on the head with my Hanukkah present because she's Christian, I'm Jewish, and she got me your book. I had never heard of the book. And to be fair, I'd heard of Endless Boogie, but I didn't know you by name. I opened this book and I'm like, what in the fuck is this? The closest corollary that I can think of is Dominic Priory's Look, Listen, Vibrate, Smile, which, by the way, had a similar effect on me about 30 years previous. So I start reading your book, then I start listening to the music in your book, then I start your book over and read it with rapt attention and start waking up in the middle of the night to listen to these records. And it has it performs a sort of, soundectomy on my being. And it has a total it really revolutionizes kind of the way that I listen to stuff. And, so I start trying to seek you out, and it's not an overnight process. It was a lot easier to find, a lot of people that I thought would be much harder to find. But finally I found you. And over the course of months, we've been talking about putting this show together.
Yes, I'm so glad you found me. And I know why it's hard to find me, because I'm the kind of person, especially enhanced by isolation and COVID, who really lives with what's right in front of me. So I cringe when I open my computer sometimes. When I did do social media, I was really excited first on Facebook because I can post all these songs and freak people out. And then the snowball got bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden I realized I had to run away from it. So I'm so glad you found me. And it's...
And it worked out great because over the course of, I don't remember the exact moment or what month even that we got in touch. It was in 2022. Right. Today is July 30th that we're taping this, but we've probably been talking about this show and the prospects of it for 5 months.
Pretty easily, because we were talking about it before April, and then April I was away on tour with the band, and then we talked some more, and then my technical incompetence slowed things down as far as getting recordings together and so forth. Then I went off on tour again, and now I'm back. And so it's like this thing, I have this feeling in my head, it's a long time coming, and I'm extra psyched now that we're doing
No, it worked out perfectly because in the interim, instead of just diving into this thing and wondering, am I going to get along with this guy? You and I have developed a friendship. So now with this show, there's, a repartee that's built from countless phone conversations of, hey, are we starting this week or what?
Right. In fact, that sort of jives with, my sense of music too, because we've developed a human relationship, and my relationship to all these records, number one, is the human being behind them. When I hear these records, I don't think of them as a separate thing. I don't think of them in the context of some art that can be appreciated by somebody divorced from the story behind it and the human being behind it. And also the fact that since music only exists in your head anyways, now, even the old music, it only exists now in every person's head. So it's the human connection. And one of the things that excited me when I came up with the term real people with Kenneth Higney is that I felt like even before I spoke to him, I was connecting with his mind.
Yeah. Because, these people, I don't know if I don't know what percentage of these recording artists, and they are a recording artist, just like, John Landis once told me, do you know what a filmmaker, or asked me, do you know what a filmmaker is? And I said, what? And he said, it's somebody who's made a film. It's as simple as that. So if any one of these people go into a recording studio, they're a recording artist as much as Paul McCartney, as much as Mick Jagger.
Absolutely.
So these people, I don't know what percentage of them go in thinking this is the first of many records, or this is it. This is my chance. This is the one chance I'll ever get. Mm-hmm. So the latter category, those people are dumping their souls onto the lathe, if they use a lathe. I don't know if that's actually the terminology here, but is a lathe what they would still use?
Yes, especially since we're talking vinyl and pre-digital world, and the time when somebody who was driven to make music couldn't just use these garage band things and stuff and sit around just doing things. They had a huge struggle ahead of them. First, almost none of them had the capacity to record, so they had to get a studio together. They had to get the records pressed. They'd get the records back. They'd have no way to get them around out of the neighborhood, basically, for the most case. So it's a driven artist sort of thing. And I totally one of the key things I realized when I was listening to these is this art cuts as deep as anything as famous, because they're all human beings expressing what life is like for them. Some of them wanted to be stars.
But a lot of these people, it cuts deeper because there's no commercial considerations. It's more, the emphasis is more on, I have to make sure that the reflection on wax is absolutely 100% exactly as I am on the inside, because this is my one chance. And, commercial artists are not thinking that way.
No. And I know some of these people that I did track down were, had those ambitions, but at that stage, they were trying to put themselves across the best they could. And basically, one of the beauties of the more isolated these people are, the better, the less they're not tainted by those things, the commercial music business. And that dilutes so many, great records, so many albums, of course, famous albums we've all heard, where you just cannot get it out of your mind that this has been beating a dead horse to get to the final product, and putting a barrier between the mind and the expression of the person and what somebody else outside there will hear. So
that's beautifully said, because you even look at an artist who is known for cutting deep. Let's say somebody like Bowie. You can look at any one of the incarnations that he's utilized in the 70s and see them as blockades between who he is and what he's feeling. I mean, how the fuck am I supposed to look? I love Bowie. Don't get me wrong. This is like grist for the mill as a, potential argument for private press and the intimacy thereof. Because how am I supposed to get some kind of idea of who Bowie is as a person by examining the Thin White Duke?
Yes, there becomes this whole image thing that does become a blockade. And one of the great things about the Beatles and people like that is they managed to transcend that and reach people of all walks of life. And you could detect things in themselves. And that's not always the case with, of course, with most popular music and pop music today. When I walk into a store and I hear what the current hits are, that is extremely the other direction. Instantly, you hear nothing but calculation with money in mind. And the thing I hate, auto-tune with vocals, to make the vocal perfect, where a vocal, for me, my favorite singers, famous singers would be people like Bob Dylan and so forth, just because it's coming from the soul. And they seem, to be a little bit aware that life is not perfect. Life is transient. Capturing feeling is about now, not about making some, dead statue for all times.
Right. Yeah. I mean, look, I don't have anything against music that's created for profit, or, I don't have anything against artistic obfuscation either. Nothing. And frankly, without having had an explicit conversation with you about it, I get the idea that you don't deride that other kind of stuff.
Oh, not at all. I'm a huge pop music fan, for one thing. And some of the most, from one perspective, it would be inane. But from the other perspective, it's a catchy song. It creates a little movie in your mind. And it's relatable to everybody. I mean, I even love songs like Brandy by The Looking Glass.
I mean, that's a great song. And by the way, Jersey Boys, that's good stuff. Mm-hmm. That's a great example of good music is good music, man. I even like Phil Collins. I don't give a shit. I'm 50 years old. I don't care what, I'm way beyond deeming something a guilty pleasure. For me, it's just a pleasure at this point.
Yes, it's a pleasure. And so many people, including myself, I have detected that this thing where you're limiting yourself. Your mind isn't open if you start judging things outside of themselves with these preconceived notions that get in your head. So I'm open to everything. There are places I never have time to go just because of how long I'm here or something, but I love all kind of music. If I had time, I could probably even get into industrial music. And I've heard some free jazz and some things like that, but there's never time. But I know in every angle music can come at you from, are things that are truly brilliant and valuable. So I don't rule anything out from that perspective. There's certainly things that bum me out.
Look, if I was to, open my ears and open myself up to somebody who's trying to, throw down some suggestions, and there was a snootiness involved with it and a highfalutin kind of a deal, then there's not much that would separate you from any one of, countless rock critics. And with this show, with Discograffiti, I'm trying to get away from that. And this is really kind of about, the hoi polloi with great taste, discovering this stuff. This is not, trying to beat a dead horse with the same kinds of, rock critic terminology that have been bandied about for 50 years. The most stringent rules definitely seem to be, when you first got to New York, there was the most stringent sorts of rules to be parts of those cliques.
Oh yeah, the punk cliques, exactly.
It's all meet the new boss, same as the old boss shit.
And there were good glimmers there, like when Heart of Glass came out by Blondie, and there was all of this punk versus disco, all these tribal things going on in that, and the people that are really open to music, a song like that, that's, those two identities aren't supposed to mix, but mixing things up is what moves life ahead.
So I want to, just talk about this episode versus the ones that are coming down the pike. So this one is an introduction of Paul and an introduction of what this show is. The private press is not Discograffiti, but it is under the Discograffiti umbrella. And it really is Paul's show. And this one is really just, I want to kind of go through and talk about your life and what led you here. So you worked at Bleecker Bob's, right?
Well, no, actually, it was a store called Village Oldies, which is a legendary store that went back to pre-psychedelic days. And when that store started, Bleecker Bob and the guy who owned Village Oldies, whose name was Broadway Al, were partners for a while. Then they had a falling out, and Bleecker Bob established his own store. And by the time I got to New York City, Bleecker Bob's was on, the beam of all the punk stuff coming out and so forth. And Village Oldies had become more of a twilight zone of a record store. There were punk in there and so forth in that, but it was more about the oldies and so forth. And
I do want to say that in your book, you go into great detail about your time there, and it is very fascinating. So I don't want to put too much of that stuff in here, because the idea also is that we got to get people to buy your book, because it's one of the better books I own. A lot of good stuff about your time working at record stores. How many years were you in that scene?
I was from the time I came to New York, I instantly got that job. And this was a time when I needed to come up with $98 a month. So the fact that the store paid $2 an hour and all the beer you could drink and so forth, and you could just play records all day and have fun was the thing. But I stayed there about 3 years. Then briefly, I moved to the opposite of that sort of record store environment, a store called Second Coming Records, which we don't need to get into. But around the time I did that was when I first started putting ads in Goldmine. And
but I just out of curiosity, why don't you want to get into it? I'm so curious.
Oh, they're just like Village Oldies. I mean, there are a million more stories than even in the book. And this place, there are, a lot of the things, and I noticed this when I was even reviewing some of the records and things, there are certain things that I thought, well, I can't really reveal this information.
Right.
But let me say, I could probably, reveal that the guy who ran Second Coming was a business shark. He was one of the biggest bootleggers in New York. There was a huge case where eventually, they confiscated hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash and pressing machines. And let's say he had a tenuous relationship with mob people and so forth. And
thank God it's only tenuous.
On and on. Yeah. I think this is okay to say. I don't even know if he's still walks the earth, but not to go too far with it. But I had a girlfriend that was Italian that those guys liked a lot, and he was cheating on her a lot. And one day they broke into his store just to freak him out and send him a message, don't mess around on her.
Oh, boy.
And I worked there for a while, but it was the exact same time. I'd already been buying all the obscure records and private pressings. And in the pre-internet days, of course, anything that wasn't, some, Beatles Butcher cover, or at the time, Mothers of Invention or Nas albums or stuff, anything that the store owner didn't know, and this held true for so long, any private pressing would be in the junk section. So, I got onto that really quick, and, I came to New York and found, I can find all these, German krautrock style records and some things that came over in that, and they're all really cheap. And then, I had a flashpoint once where two German guys came into Village Oldies, and that was my first exposure. They came in the store and I think bought a chocolate watch band and a couple of things. And they said, "Can you tell us anywhere else we can, find these kind of records?" I said, "Oh, well, I get off work today at 8:00. You should really come over to my apartment." And they were honest guys. They bought like what then was like big money, $600 or $700 worth of records, and said, "Oh, just send them to us." And they disappeared. And that got me into checking out Goldmine and so forth. So
that was your first deal as a record dealer?
That would have been, except previous to that, I was also, because I was getting paid so little, although it was enough with my expenses then, I gathered pretty quickly I could go from one used record store and buy some underpriced stuff and take it to another used record store and make my rent like in one afternoon, just like taking, shifting records between stores that I wasn't interested in myself, but I knew they were underpriced.
How many years did you go where that was your exclusive or primary source of income?
That was just shortly. It totally switched over after I had quit the second record shop, which also dovetailed at the time I got into a relationship and stopped playing in, the sorceries and the various bands I was playing in. I got into the record collecting then, big time. Started putting ads in Goldmine, developed a list of contacts, started trading records with people around the world, started tracking people down the private pressings to see if I could get a box and so forth. So
now your catalogs, which would seem to me to go the extra mile, many of which are reprinted in your book. I'm not part of that world. I don't, I didn't come up, taken with private press. So are you going above and beyond what's typical? Are your catalogs truly unique? Or are there people who are typically, instead of just putting in what condition the record is, going off the rails like you and creating these brilliant descriptors?
I think I took that, more to the extreme, driven by my passion for the records and my sense of adventure. When I was
they read like you can't help yourself.
Yeah, it was like that. I would get going. I couldn't help myself. I wish I could have just spoken these things instead of having to type.
Which is what your book is, right? Your book isn't it just a transcription of what you're saying?
Except for the one chapter that's about like when I was a kid in Kentucky, and the one about Village Oldies. Those two I wrote, but everything else was, and this came at a time in my life when they proposed doing the book. Johann Kugelberg, who had been getting my catalog since the late 80s, had moved to New York. And, he was actually the first drummer in Endless Boogie and a bunch of other things going on there. But with those catalogs, there were other people, and I didn't know them until I met a couple of people in New York that were interested, that came in the store. And when I started putting ads in Goldmine, I found out, in every major city in the U.S. and sometimes small towns, there's that one guy who's into this stuff. They weren't really dealing the records then. There were a few people dealing, and some people overseas that would do descriptions, but not the way that I did.
Not with your level of eloquence, I'm sure.
Or not to pump myself up too much, but more imagination and more excitement in my descriptions than concern for hyping a record up.
Right. And because you're still honest the whole time. If you think something's kind of shitty, you're not gonna you're gonna risk not selling the record by being honest about it, right?
Exactly, and I would do that, especially in the early days. It was tricky too. Because I'd spent a lot of time playing records over the phones for people, but, I get a sense of somebody's taste, or they like this, and I think, they might like this and this, but it's, back in that day's money, it was like $50, $100, a really expensive one. So I'd always say, if you're bummed out about this thing, send it back, we'll do something else. But I was really concerned, knowing the way it is, when I open a package up, I'm excited and I get a letdown. I did not want anybody I sent records to open their package and not feel like they're entering some adventure and some new world, something making them excited. And
so is this your main thing? There's so many aspects of your life and so many tendrils of your career. So where would you? Was this just one thing amongst many, or is it the main deal?
It became the main thing early 80s, 82, 83 would be the first time, I tracked records down and realized I wanted other copies, and started trading with, as I found out about them, other people. And
in 1982, by the way, just in case you're listening to this and you didn't live through that time, is the least psychedelic year since the psychedelic era. And that includes, the last 50 years. It's not a psychedelic time.
And when it really started happening would have been 1985, 86, because that's when I first started doing the catalogs, the very first ones, and everything else fell by the wayside as far as playing music myself. Even reading a book or watching a movie, I would just be anxious, like because I had to be all day long getting all these boxes of private pressings and odd records and boxes from South America, which I knew nothing about except a few things. Always. Every day I'd wake up, have breakfast, and I'd be playing records I never heard before for until the wee hours of the morning, for years. So it consumed all my time. And
it's like me with this show. I mean, it's all the time. When it consumes you like that, when, for our whole lives, we're obsessed with music. And then you figure out a way to allow it to engulf you in a way that's productive and gives you a daily passion, and forget about it.
Right. And for me, it was driven by the sense that I was off on some expedition, because every time I came across some fantastic thing that sounded like nothing else before, I felt like I was, every time I walked into a used record store and said, "Where's you keep all your garbage?" And I start looking through it and find some unknown psychedelic private pressing, or just anything that looked exotic. It was like digging for, buried treasure. And I knew there was so much buried treasure out there that it was hard to not do it 24/7.
Right. You never, as a music lover, you never reach bottom anyway, but as a private press collector, it seems like it is particularly endless.
And also it was like going into the Twilight Zone, into a new world that exists as this alternate dimension.
Bizarro universe.
even the psychedelic and garage and all the things that I formed on when I first turned 12 in 1966 and heard those, garage punk singles and that, even that kind of thing, it sort of stayed in that sort of world or something. And when I got into private pressings, it was like there's this parallel world, the name I used for my label, in fact, in the 90s, this parallel world out there that is as rich and varied as what everybody knows about.
So let's actually talk about real people, because I want to state for the record that when I started reading your book, I wasn't interested in the real people stuff. I'm a psych nerd, so when I saw the psych records, I went straight there and started checking those out. But what really blew me away is the fact that by the time I was done with the book, the more fascinating releases in it are the real people. And that's where you really got me and changed me, because it's not something I'd ever been cognizant of before, having my attention focused more on that kind of stuff. So tell us what's real people? Did you coin that term? And what's your experience with discovering your love for what that is?
Yeah, I did coin the term, and it was the crucial fall of 1977 when the package came to where I was living in New Jersey. We had a little ad in the Aquarium, a New Jersey entertainment newspaper, advertising that we had a recording studio in the basement. And Kenneth Higney saw that and sent this package and said, I'm not looking to record anything, but can you help me promote my music? And when that came, and I listened to the record, and my friends there as well that were living at the house at the time in my band and so forth, heard the record, they were astonished, but they had the thing like, this is, everything's wrong with this record, but I love it. They at least made that, perception, where they weren't doing the thing that happened during the incredibly strange music fad of the 90s and so forth, where these records, people are like listening to like a novelty, something to... Yeah,
you hold it at an arm's distance.
Arm's distance and make fun of it and think or don't realize the depth of this, because you're put off, by this. This person has no talent, they would think, or something.
It's like that guy William Hung from American Idol. There's this culture now that's accepted where the audience is pointing and laughing, and it's usually it's a fat guy falling or a dumb person saying something stupid, and it's I find it disturbing. And so what I really connect with in terms of your approach to this stuff is it completely supersedes and transcends all that bullshit.
I think so. And I've certainly had a lot of experience dealing with, even before it became what it is today with a William Hung thing or something like that, dealing with people that I knew they're really smart. They know good music and that, but somehow they don't get this. And I think that plays in a little bit to the real people thing. And of course, it's, my thing that there's a real person behind this record. And getting back to the thing with Kenneth Higney being such a revelation for me is I thought this is one of the most brilliant artistic expressions in sound I've ever heard. It sounds like nothing else. It captures a personality like I felt the first time I realized how good it was. I was connected to this person as a human being. I was getting so much emotion and feeling out of it. And yet it remains so mysterious because it's a different mind than mine. Yet I have this magic door in there. And with real people, also that record did something that changed my thing. Because when I first got into the psychedelic records and hearing the Doors and Jimi Hendrix and all these people and the Beatles as a kid, they were like giants to me, like somebody, like somebody would think,
right, like mythical.
A movie star is a giant and I'm a little ant. And when I heard Kenneth Higney, it leveled the playing field. I said, they're people too.
And it's intense because you're listening. It's no longer a record. This is like the apex of somebody's life. And it's predetermined already because so much time has gone by that this is their time coming and going. That's what it represents. So it's very dramatic, whereas just another release off the assembly line for, somebody else who's got a multi-album deal, it does not have that kind of urgency built into it. And so that's part of what sort of goes into this idea that you talk about in your book about growing a new pair of ears. And I felt it happening to me. It did happen to me. That was the thing that, if anything, changed my life, because music is such a key part of my life. And to be able to come at this whole genre or movement or whatever you want to call it in a completely different way is entirely down to you.
That certainly I feel like I was a channel for that. It had to happen. Yeah. I was on it early, and
it happened to you immediately, right? Because Higney's the first one that crossed your path.
Changed my life. I had some other things that were unusual, and I had other private pressings, but up till that point, they were mostly, like garage psych bands and this and that. But that was the one that flipped the switch on for me. And then I can't remember now. I'd have to think too much right now, but there were a few other things that I had accumulated by then that cast the light on it. Like, whoa, okay.
Well, so are you still practicing collecting and dealing with as much intensity through the 90s?
No, I went through it so intensely for so long.
Have you heard everything?
No, there are things I haven't. I still, when something amazing or somebody turns me on to something that has been uncovered that wasn't known before, and I will still listen. The other thing is,
and I want to say that I went through, and as you were recommending these records in your book, I'm listening to everything. There's only 8 records in your book that are not available either on streaming services or I could not find to download, and they're still on a separate list that I plan on finding at some point.
Back in the day, days of the adventure and going out to used record stores, and that you knew that all this knowledge was not assembled, and you had that feeling, I'm the first person to stumble across this. This is really significant, Right. And back in the day, as I developed the network of people around the world, it was extremely secretive. People would send me tapes of things they discovered, and they would scramble the sequence of the songs and not give any information, so I could just hear the music because they didn't want anybody to know. And lots of guys had these, sort of things, and would have to judge it totally just on the value of the music. You use the new ears that were growing more and more in that process. A good example of a record like that was one called Mystery Meat, which somebody had sent me a tape of, and the fidelity on the tape was terrible, and it made it sound more mysterious, and nobody knew about this record. Some secretive stuff, later somebody discovered it and found them in that. And when I finally heard a reissue of the record, it sounded much more normal or something. I said, well, actually, this is like a really good garage band that you could imagine like a little bit of psychedelic in there somehow. But that murky tape made it sound way more psychedelic. And so there were these big mysteries, around that people talk of. And, I remember I tried to find the guy. I found out who the guy's name was that had the Mystery Meat album. And somebody said he doesn't have a phone and so forth. And he was in the Midwest somewhere. And I got his address and I wrote him letters, and he'd never write back to me. And I was going nuts thinking, I know who has this record and I can't.
I love how my hunt for you mirrors your hunt for a lot of these people. And by the way, in looking at the road before us, Paul and I have a mutually cohered outlook on what this show is, and the private press is not going to be just Paul and I. We're definitely going to be tracking these people down. It's something that I think, Paul, you used to do with more fervor, maybe 20, 30 years ago, but
right. And it'll be a lot easier now. Of course, yeah, I've noticed already how to get through to some people and so forth because of the internet and so forth. But back when I first started tracking people down, I had to go down to the public library in New York with a list of every name on the back of all these albums, where it was from, and dig the phone book up for Topeka, Kansas, or wherever, and write down everybody with that same last name, and have this mountain of phone calls, and just start calling, figuring, okay, one of them's going to be their uncle or something, even if I didn't see the name of the actual person on the record and so forth. So, it was tough then. I was persistent. Yeah. There were a lot of people I couldn't find, but then again, a lot of great,
I can't wait. Stories. Personally, you and I have spoken about this. As part of the format of this show, one of the things I'm really excited about is the human element. That ironically, the more intensely, ridiculously culty, small, niche-like that we get with music, the more it becomes the kind of thing that literally anybody can relate to, because you get super obscure and you get just one-on-one, a person with their dreams going down, and creating 50 records. And it means so much more to him than whatever, some big release it could ever possibly mean to anyone. So, toward that end, the way that the private press is going to differ from Discograffiti proper is, number one, it's going to be shorter, because each episode is not really about a band as much as it is about, in all likelihood, the one record they made. In some instances, it's somebody who's made a bunch of records, and that'll be a longer show. Generally it's going to be about one record or the history of one band that made one record. Just like Discograffiti, there will be a star rating for it. We're also going to be talking about how many copies are in existence of its original pressing, the worth of the LP, based on obviously on its condition, whether or not it's been reissued, whether it's on streaming services, so how you can track this shit down so that you're not just listening to two dudes talking about it, whether or not Paul has had personal encounters with the artists that we're talking about, where they are now. And then, to me, kind of the most crucial thing, I'm in a shorthand sense, I'm calling it Dashed Hopes crossover material. And this is sort of the dichotomy of where this person or people saw themselves, let's say 50 years ago. Maybe they were a self-styled psychedelic guru, and now they're an accountant, or their grandpa, or their, what is that gulf? How big is that gulf?
Where did their life go? Speaking of that gulf, one of the things that happened to me, especially since most of these records were the one-off, the person put their heart and soul into it. They had to be so driven to actually get it out there. And then they have their record sitting there. And what do you do next? All of a sudden, it stays in the neighborhood or something. Nobody hears it. They get frustrated. They think, they're.
But there's also, there's
a failure. But one of the beauties of
do you know people who've completed a huge Herculean project and then sat scared, and instead of trying, they just sat on it? I know plenty of people like that.
And I think some of them, they even tried, but the way the world was back then, the major labels controlling basically everything, the market, and that, they could try to sell their records if they did a live show, or, send them off sometimes. A lot of the rarest private pressings, the person would send them off to the major labels. And of course, nothing ever happened. And one of the beauties and one of the double-edged swords of the internet for me relating to this is some of the multiple times the person I tracked down finally got a hold of and said, I love your record. I'll give you $50 or $100 for every copy you can find, which was big money then, knowing I could double my money at least or something, part of the motivation. But multiple times when I finally got a hold of the person, they were convinced I was one of their friends playing a practical joke on them, because they had so little success and their dreams were dashed so much that, decades went by and, sometimes they hadn't even, thought of it or something. And then as the internet did get going later, when I still was tracking some people down in that, I could say to them, you're not lost in time. You should look your record up on YouTube. 40,000 people have heard your record, which is like, like 39,500 more than ever heard it back then.
It's not just
lost the time.
Like I'm Facebook friends with Ruth Ann Friedman. Do you know who it is? Yeah, so
Mindy,
her, everybody, Bob Lind, I'm Facebook friends with. These are people who are like, I don't understand how there's a second win happening for my most obscure record, which nobody bought the first time round. It does give artists such as them as another lease on life, which is amazing.
Well, absolutely, they're in a position where anybody in the world can hear about it with just pushing a button if they hear something. And the accessibility that way, definitely things go viral when some astonishing private pressing does come up. Some of them languish and not that many hits, including some that I think are fantastic, but eventually the cream rises to the top and something's astonishing, Steve Morgan, not a private pressing, but was a good case, and he had some success then. And there's a long story and some tragedy and what happened where it didn't happen. But now you look on YouTube and millions of people have listened to his music. So I think it's so wonderful in the autumn years of a lot of these people, especially private press people, like in their autumn years, something that meant so much to them in their youth and when they were, feeling creative and had something to say, that it took a long time, but they reached beyond their wildest dreams.
Mm-hmm. And that's well said. And the only other thing I want to talk about before we sign off here is about Endless Boogie. So we haven't really gotten around to that. You are a rock star. You've had a band for 25 fucking years now, and you have 6 records, you have EPs. Your music is kind of a mishmash of krautrock, the Stooges, Flamin' Groovy, ZZ Top, right?
Yeah, those are some of the elements, and it goes different places. I would say I'm a cult rock star, and it's a full circle for me because when I was a child in Kentucky and isolated in a very environment, I wanted so bad, to be in a band, and I followed that, pursued that, didn't really know what I was doing, but came up to New York, and got to play at CBGB's and Max's Kansas City and that, and then dropped it for the record collecting thing. And because of the record collecting thing, Johan Kugelberg and Jesper Eklow, who's the ringleader of Endless Boogie, I met them because of that. And then they said, oh, let's jam together, and stuff, with intentions, and it went on for several years that way. It was just getting together and jamming, having fun, making tapes.
It's a bunch of guys that emanate from Matador, correct?
Jesper did. Johan came over when they founded Matador and was one of the original people at Matador.
Just out of curiosity, is that the Stephen Malkmus connection? Because your first gig was
yes, because he was on Matador, and Jesper turned him on to Australian rock, lots of things. Before I came into the picture, more in the mid to late 90s, when I started hanging out with those guys and met them. So yeah, that is the connection there. Steve, of course, being huge, into record collecting. And too, speaking of which, he loves the New Dawn, and he lives around there and so forth. And so he has the wide open ears. So it came sort of through that. And a little bit, we don't like this idea of, people emphasizing, a Brooklyn band, Matador employees or something, because really we're all music freaks from childhood and so forth. And of course, they happened to gravitate to working in the music industry and so forth. But there's some kind of thing, and I'll bring up Canned Heat quickly because of this. There's a certain thing I've encountered, like, music, hipsters, et cetera, working for labels and stuff. Somehow you can't really be authentic, with that sort of thing going on, like some unknown band from somewhere that, that thing we're getting back to about being tainted by the music industry or something. Mm-hmm. I say to people, well, Canned Heat, and this is record collectors too, but is the basis.
Record collector.
We're huge record collectors.
Oh yeah, no, especially Bob.
Yeah, Bob Haidt and Alan Wilson. Right, yeah. Exactly.
But if you look, you want to talk, if you want to go at it, Bob and Al, very different level of songwriting acumen.
Oh yeah, Alan Wilson is.
Al is one of the great unsung geniuses of all time.
Alan Wilson took it to the deeper place, and of course he was, more coming from the country blues and such things. Right, he is uncanny, and also I highly recommend his biography, of course, and so forth. Living an extraordinary, tragic life.
Yeah.
When you know about that, it just makes the music more human. He's real people.
He is real people. And he's also probably the least celebrated member of the 27 Club.
Right. And maybe the first.
Is he before Brian Jones?
Not Brian Jones. Yeah, but before Jimmy and Janice.
Definitely a trendsetter, but not in a good way. So, okay, Paul has tons of records, tons of EPs. He's got the great book. Besides everything that we've mentioned that is a necessity to purchase, anything else you want to plug, sir?
I would say I would want to plug what is coming down the pike, what we're doing here.
Oh, unquestionably. So
people that are listening to this, and check out the music. Spread it around to your friends.
Spread it around. So, become a member of Patreon. You will have access to a weekly show. It will be weekly from, for the private press, amongst all kinds of other goodies. Patreon, we are actually, there's different tiers, but you're going to have access to a tremendous amount of content that you normally would not if you're just going to check out the podcast proper. Become a member of Patreon. We will see you for episode number 1. Just around the bend. It's going to be on a band called Fraction. Paul?
Mm-hmm.
We'll see him on the lathe of the private press.